The tributes are pouring in tonight for the actor Patrick Swayze. He died at the age of 57. Patrick Swayze wasn't just a Hollywood icon. He was a symbol of resilience, elegance, and unshakable charm. But behind the polished public image, the final chapter of his life has remained clouded by silence, speculation, and conflicting accounts. Officially, Swayze fought pancreatic cancer with extraordinary courage. But over the years, persistent rumors sealed medical records, and a series of decisions surrounding his passing have fueled questions that never quite went away. This isn't an attempt to rewrite history. It's an exploration of the lesser-known threads that many fans never got to hear. From his medical journey to emotional and legal complications behind the scenes, this story reveals a side of Patrick's final months that continues to spark conversation, concern, and confusion. Patrick Swayze's case was considered closed long ago. But the questions still linger, and they might change how we remember his final days. The image of immortality. To the world, Patrick Swayze seemed invincible, a man whose strength, elegance, and charm defied time and hardship. Whether dancing in Dirty Dancing, vanishing into the afterlife in Ghost, or chasing waves in Point Break, he didn't just perform, he embodied resilience. His on-screen presence was shaped by a lifetime of discipline, the grace of ballet from his mother, and the grit of a rodeo cowboy from his father. It was a mix that made him unforgettable and seemingly unstoppable. But off-camera, a different story was unfolding. By the mid-2000s, years of intense training and pushing through pain were catching up with him. His body, once finely tuned, was beginning to falter. Joints ached, exhaustion lingered, and then came the diagnosis that changed everything. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. When news of his death broke in September 2009, the world mourned a beloved actor lost too soon. But behind the headlines, a quieter storm was brewing. Rumors, sealed files, and emotional fallout that raised more questions than answers. And while the official cause was clear, the circumstances surrounding his final months remain anything but. Diagnosis surrounded by silence. Patrick Swayze's cancer diagnosis wasn't just a personal tragedy. It became the center of a silence that still hasn't been fully broken. Officially, the world knew he was fighting for his life. But behind the scenes, his final chapter was marked by secrecy, unanswered questions, and a series of choices that left many wondering what truly happened in his last months. It began with signs so subtle they were easy to dismiss, the kind of aches and discomfort that could be blamed on the demands of an actor's life. In late 2007, at a New Year's Eve celebration in Aspen, Patrick felt an unexpected burn in his throat as champagne slid down, a sharp sensation like acid that caught him off guard. Over the weeks that followed, other symptoms emerged. Persistent cramps that gnawed at his abdomen, bouts of constipation that disrupted his routine, and a troubling, unexplainable weight loss that alarmed even those closest to him. Patrick, ever the fighter, tried to rationalize the symptoms. Stress from his career, a passing stomach bug, anything to avoid admitting that something far worse was unfolding inside. But the mirror told a harsher truth. His eyes, once clear and vibrant, now bore the telltale yellow tint of jaundice. The pain intensified, becoming sharp and unrelenting, a warning signal his body could no longer ignore. By January 2008, the reality could no longer be postponed. At Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, surrounded by the sterile walls of a hospital room, doctors delivered the devastating diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic adenocarcinoma, a cancer notoriously aggressive and merciless. The disease had already metastasized, spreading insidiously to his liver. The prognosis was grim. Weeks, maybe months at best. Publicly, Patrick remained the embodiment of grit and determination. He continued to show up, to smile, and to fight with every ounce of his being. Yet the medical documents revealed a harsher picture. His once strong frame was rapidly deteriorating. His skin stretched tight over bones that no longer held their former strength. Infections ravaged his system, and inflammation flared constantly. Despite the pain, he refused strong analgesics, determined to feel every moment, every sharp breath, every pulse, as if it was a final testament to his life's raw authenticity. Then came a series of choices that baffled those watching from the outside. No biopsy report was ever released to the public. Media outlets reported conflicting medical details, and in a surprising move, his wife, Lisa Niemi, arranged for his body to be cremated just 2 days after he died, effectively closing the door on any independent review or autopsy. For some, this was simply a family's right to privacy. For others, it became the focal point of lingering doubt. Why the secrecy? Why the rush? And why do those closest to him still speak of those final months in vague, guarded terms? To this day, no evidence has emerged to challenge the official diagnosis. But the lack of transparency, the speed of the cremation, and the inconsistencies in public versus private accounts have fueled a quiet storm of speculation, one that refuses to fully die out. Because in the end, this wasn't just about a beloved actor lost to illness. It was about how that loss was handled publicly and privately, and the sense that something in the silence still doesn't sit right. The medical maze. Patrick Swayze's struggle with illness didn't begin with a diagnosis. It had been shadowing him for years. Having been a smoker since his teenage years, he was no stranger to cigarettes, reportedly consuming up to 3 packs a day. This habit alone carried significant risks, but layered on top was a long, difficult battle with alcoholism. These struggles were no secrets. His drinking worsened notably after his father's death in 1982. A grief that lingered heavily and again resurfaced in the 1990s when a string of film failures took a toll on his spirit and stability. Medical professionals pointed to these factors, smoking and alcohol, as significant contributors to the development of his pancreatic cancer, a cruel disease that often strikes silently and fatally. Yet beyond these well-known risk factors, there was a more complex and technical battle underway. In his final months, Patrick was enrolled in a clinical trial for an experimental drug called vatilinib. This drug belonged to a category known as angiogenesis inhibitors, which aimed to block the formation of new blood vessels that tumors rely on to grow and spread. The hope was that paired with chemotherapy, vatilinib would starve the cancer, slowing its advance. Initial results seemed promising. Tumor growth decelerated, and media outlets hailed the treatment as a beacon of hope, painting Patrick as a brave fighter at the cutting edge of medical innovation. However, the promise of this treatment came at a terrible cost. The side effects were severe and relentless. Despite the physical toll, Patrick refused to halt his work. Even as his immune system weakened drastically, he pushed himself to continue filming. On multiple occasions, he reportedly collapsed on set, barely able to stand. Infections flared repeatedly, each time setting back his fragile health. His appetite disappeared almost entirely, and in just 6 months, he lost over 50 pounds, his body wasting away visibly. His days were marked by bouts of violent vomiting and cold sweats, evidence of the harsh physical struggle he endured every moment. To many, his decision to continue filming the beast was a testament to his fierce determination. Yet beneath this heroic narrative, others raised darker questions. Was Patrick being driven too hard by those around him? Some whispered that he was medicated beyond reason, urged forward by those with financial or emotional stakes in his performance. As his condition worsened, the boundary between informed consent and quiet surrender began to blur. Was he truly in control of his care, or had his autonomy been slowly eclipsed by a web of well-meaning but overpowering influences, from doctors to loved ones, to the weight of public expectation? The medical maze he navigated was not just about battling cancer, but also about the murky lines of control and consent in his final fragile days. And while the science behind his treatment became a matter of headlines, What remained largely hidden was the devastating toll it took on his body and how little of that reality the public was ever allowed to see. The physical toll hidden from cameras. In the public eye, Patrick Swayze was defying all odds, still working, still smiling, still fighting. But behind the controlled press appearances and camera-ready moments was a far more harrowing reality. His final year was marked by an unmistakable physical decline, one that those closest to him say was carefully shielded from public view. Whether it was by personal choice, professional pressure, or the tightly managed environment orchestrated by those around him, the reality of Patrick's suffering was largely hidden. But to the few who saw behind the curtain, the transformation was heartbreaking. Reports from crew members and insiders indicated that Patrick struggled with even the simplest physical movements. Tasks that had once been effortless became monumental challenges. Allegedly, he required constant assistance to stand and move, and his limbs frequently trembled with uncontrollable spasms. His body, ravaged by disease and treatment, seemed to betray him, at every turn becoming fragile and unsteady in ways that were hidden from public view. On set, the environment reportedly grew tense as those around him witnessed alarming physical symptoms. There were accounts of sudden violent shivers overtaking Patrick's body, convulsions that resembled unrelenting chills. Between filming takes, he was said to retreat into isolated corners, curling up as waves of nausea overcame him. These episodes reportedly involved profuse sweating and vomiting, displaying a level of physical exhaustion and fragility that contrasted starkly with his earlier vitality. Despite these debilitating symptoms, it is said that Patrick exhibited extraordinary determination. He reportedly avoided narcotic painkillers for much of his illness, insisting on maintaining awareness of his condition rather than dulling the pain. According to some close acquaintances, he expressed a desire to remain mentally present, famously stating, "I want to know where I'm at." Whether this stance was motivated by courage, stubbornness, or a mixture of both remains a subject of speculation. Only toward the very end of his life is it reported that he consented to morphine treatment, with the powerful opioid providing some relief, but too late to alter the course of his declining health. Medical documentation from his final months allegedly details a cascade of failing organ systems. Internal bleeding within his gastrointestinal tract, severe imbalances in electrolytes such as dangerously low sodium and elevated calcium, and a compromised immune system all contributed to an accelerated physical collapse. Infections reportedly struck repeatedly, overwhelming his diminished defenses. The overall picture described is one of a body steadily surrendering to an unrelenting assault. Yet the most unsettling revelations are not limited to his deteriorating health. What transpired after his passing, particularly regarding medical decisions and the handling of his remains, raises even deeper questions. And at the center of those questions was the one person who remained closest to Patrick until the end: his wife, Lisa Niemi. Their bond was celebrated publicly, but privately, those around them weren't so sure. The marriage behind closed doors. For years, the union between Patrick Swayze and Lisa Niemi was painted in the glossy colors of Hollywood romance. Two artists bound by passion shared dreams and the kind of enduring love that could weather anything. They were the epitome of resilience, the couple who faced the brutal glare of fame and the crushing weight of illness hand in hand, inspiring millions with their public displays of devotion and strength. But behind closed doors, some say a very different reality was unfolding. Friends close to the couple later spoke often off the record about tensions that simmered beneath the surface. They described a relationship strained by the pressures of fame, long separations, emotional exhaustion, and the complex dynamics that can arise when one becomes critically ill. Some even hinted at moments of volatility, arguments that left emotional bruises, and periods of distance that seemed at odds with their public image. dark rumors emerged, stories that chilled those who heard them. One disturbing account alleges that Lisa, in a fit of rage, brandished a Colt Peacemaker revolver and threatened Patrick during one of their most heated arguments. It was said that desperation and frustration boiled over in ways no one had publicly imagined. Another unverified claim suggested Lisa had once physically attacked Patrick, clawing at his neck and slapping him during a particularly vulnerable time when his strength was failing under the weight of illness. These allegations, first brought to light in Globe magazine, were met with fierce denial from Lisa Nemi, who insisted on her innocence and loyalty to her late husband's memory. These stories, though sensationalized in tabloids, sparked quiet conversations among fans and observers, conversations that never quite disappeared. Lisa Niemi has maintained that she stood by her husband until the end, advocated for his privacy, and later became a public voice for pancreatic cancer awareness. Many who knew her personally reject the darker rumors as unfounded or exaggerated, yet the speculation lingers. What fuels it isn't just the allegations themselves, but the surrounding context, the emotional toll of Patrick's illness, the isolation that can accompany caregiving, and the lack of transparency that followed his death. The swift cremation, the sealed documents, and the conflicting reports about his final days created a void, one that in the absence of clarity has been filled with whispers. It's impossible to know the full truth of what went on between Patrick and Lisa in their most private moments. Every relationship has complexities the outside world will never see. But in examining this chapter of Patrick Swayze's life, one thing becomes clear. The story behind the romance was far more human than Hollywood ever allowed us to believe. But what followed immediately after Patrick's death shocked even those who had grown accustomed to the secrecy. It wasn't just emotional, it was procedural. And it left behind a silence louder than any words. Cremation without answers. Patrick Swayze's final moments came quietly on the morning of September 14, 2009, bringing an end to a grueling and heartbreaking battle with pancreatic cancer that stretched over nearly 2 years. The intensity of the treatment, the private struggles, and the public battle had been exhaustively documented. Yet, just hours after his passing, the decision was made. His wife Lisa authorized an immediate cremation without requesting or allowing an autopsy. The absence of a post-mortem examination in such a high-profile, medically complex case struck many as unusual. In instances involving aggressive cancer, experimental treatments, and conflicting accounts of a patient's final days, autopsies can offer clarity not just to grieving families, but to medical communities seeking answers. They serve as tools to confirm diagnoses, rule out complications, and in rare cases detect mistreatment. For Patrick, that window was closed before it ever opened. 2 days after his passing, his ashes were scattered on the wind-swept landscape of his cherished New Mexico ranch, a place he often spoke of as his sanctuary. But as those ashes settled into the earth, so too did the final chance to uncover truths that might have changed how his death was understood. The biological clues, the tissue, the organs, the evidence of what the body had endured were gone forever, leaving a vacuum filled with questions rather than answers. To many, this seemed like the last act of love, a way to honor Patrick's wishes or Lisa's desires for privacy. But to others, it was a curtain drawn tight against scrutiny, a move that hinted at concealment. Medical experts openly questioned how a man with an initially bleak prognosis, given no more than 2 weeks to live, had survived nearly 2 years under conditions far from remission. Some called it miraculous. Others, however, pointed to the lack of transparency surrounding his condition. Was it a case of groundbreaking treatment, a strong body-defying expectations, or were there choices made behind the scenes about medication care, or even withholding of certain interventions that altered the course of his final months? Some medical observers wondered whether Patrick's extended survival was a breakthrough, or if the treatments prolonged suffering more than they preserved life. Was his nearly 2-year fight a true victory against the odds, or did it reflect a painful extension of suffering potentially influenced by decisions made to preserve public image rather than prioritize his comfort? These aren't conspiracies. They're questions born from a genuine search for clarity. And yet, without an autopsy, without a final medical report shared publicly, the speculation continues to grow in the silence left behind. But that silence didn't stop at his medical records. It extended into every corner of what Patrick left behind, especially when it came to his estate. And in that void, conflict quietly took root. Financial tensions and legal shadows. When Patrick Swayze passed away, the public mourned a beloved icon. But behind the scenes, a storm quietly brewed over the fate of his considerable estate. Reportedly valued in the tens of millions, his assets included royalties, real estate, and other investments amassed over decades of work. The handling of this estate soon became a source of strain, especially between his widow Lisa Nemi and Patrick's family, particularly his brother Don Swayze. As stipulated in his will, Lisa received the majority of Patrick's estate. However, tabloid reports at the time alleged that in the months leading up to his death, a veil of suspicion had fallen over the circumstances surrounding the final arrangements. According to these sources, Patrick's younger brother Don Swayze and other family members reportedly grew concerned about a troubling shift. That access to Patrick was becoming increasingly restricted. Visits were said to be limited. Phone calls often went unanswered, and Lisa was described as maintaining strict control over communication with the outside world. Some friends and relatives described the situation as a lockdown, where even those closest to Patrick felt shut out, without explanation or opportunity for meaningful contact. This sense of exclusion intensified when the will surfaced. The document had reportedly been amended only months before Patrick's death, shifting most assets to Lisa. Handwriting experts consulted by media outlets pointed out alarming signs. Patrick's signature appeared shaky and nearly illegible, raising questions about his physical state and the conditions under which the changes were made. Despite this speculation, no legal challenges succeeded. The family's attempts to contest the will or gain insight into Patrick's final wishes stalled in courts and closed-door negotiations. What remained was a quiet tension, one that simmered beneath the public mourning and private grief. Ultimately, Lisa stood as the sole witness to Patrick's final moments, the keeper of his final wishes, and the only person who could speak to what truly happened in those final days. To some, she was a devoted wife fulfilling her husband's desires. To others, she was the final gatekeeper of a chapter that may never be fully understood. The last 72 hours. On September 11, 2009, Patrick Swayze's condition reportedly deteriorated abruptly, leading to a loss of consciousness from which he never recovered. In those final hours, control over his care and decisions about his privacy reportedly fell squarely into the hands of his wife, Lisa. It is alleged that she exercised strict control over who could visit or receive information about his condition. Requests from media outlets were reportedly denied outright, and extended family members found themselves excluded and uninformed about his final moments. Medical care appeared to shift toward hospice-style palliation, focusing on comfort rather than aggressive treatment. Reports indicate an increase in pain medication to ease suffering as life support waned. By the morning of September 14th, Patrick was described as barely holding on, his breathing shallow and labored. At 10 a.m., he passed away. The rapidity and decisiveness of subsequent actions drew attention. Less than 2 days later, his cremation was completed. This quick progression reportedly bypassed many standard protocols that typically accompany the death of a prominent figure. No tissue samples were collected, no additional medical opinions were sought, and no delay was allowed for further examination or closure. This hastened timeline sparked considerable speculation. Friends and acquaintances, some of whom had not been informed of his death, were left grappling with unanswered questions. Was this urgency solely about privacy and respect? Or was there something more concealed beneath the surface? Rumors circulated of deliberate efforts to suppress information and prevent further scrutiny. Among those in forensic pathology circles, a particularly significant detail surfaced. Allegedly, a leaked memo authored by a former technician at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, where Patrick spent his final days, documented a request for tissue samples mere hours before the planned cremation. That request was reportedly denied, with an annotation on the memo reading "Request blocked, spousal rights override. This is final." The phrase implies an absolute and unchallengeable intervention by Lisa overriding standard medical and legal procedures. Whatever the motivation behind this decision, it effectively sealed the door on any possibility of post-mortem analysis that could have clarified unanswered questions about Patrick's health or cause of death. The window for discovery was abruptly closed. This situation raises broader concerns, not just about transparency and medical ethics, but also about control. Control over information, over legacy, and over the narrative of Patrick's final chapter. It leaves open the troubling possibility that important truths were intentionally kept from public knowledge, lost in the silence that followed. The legacy left in shadows. Officially, Patrick Swayze died from complications related to pancreatic cancer, a fact that is not disputed. However, available information suggests this is only part of the story. While public accounts focus on his bravery in battle with illness, Patrick reportedly endured immense physical suffering and emotional strain. While he lived beyond initial prognoses, it was reportedly at considerable personal cost. His marriage, though celebrated publicly, was privately described by some as tense and isolating, with claims of emotional distress that remain difficult to verify. Some have speculated that this dynamic may have negatively impacted his well-being. Though these claims remain unproven, they've added to the fog of uncertainty. Despite access to advanced medical care and experimental treatments, his death was enveloped in confusion, with many critical decisions made behind closed doors and without public transparency. No autopsy was performed, medical records were sealed, and the phrase "this is final" was allegedly used to block further inquiries, locking away any chance at deeper understanding. So has Patrick Swayze's mystery finally been solved? That depends on how you define a solution. There was no shocking twist, no uncovered conspiracy, just a series of quiet decisions, sealed records, a rushed cremation, and people who still won't speak. Maybe the real mystery isn't just what happened, but why people feel it was kept so carefully hidden. The truth might still be out there, but it's up to you to decide what to believe. What we do know for sure is this: Patrick Swayze left behind a legacy of unforgettable performances, undeniable resilience, and a spirit that inspired millions. But the circumstances surrounding his death continue to cast a long, complicated shadow. Do you believe we ever got the full truth about Patrick Swayze's final days? Or was something important kept from the world? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video with us, and catch you in the next one.